Chapter 63. Close the casket. Coffin boat enters the ghost sea. However, since Shilian was feeling both overly nervous and overly guilty, his eyes were shut tight and he remained completely unaware. The last time they had exchanged air, it was Huacheng who initiated it. He was domineering and the kiss was deep. Shilian didn't dare recall the event after the fact, only remembering that his lips had been swollen and numb. This time, he was taking the lead, and he was very cautious. He placed his lips very softly upon Huacheng's, as if he was afraid he'd accidentally wake him if he used too much force. But in retrospect, wasn't waking Huacheng his exact goal? If his kiss was too light and air leaked out between their lips, then wouldn't this be for naught? Shilian kept his eyes closed, and silently rattled off excerpts from Dao De Jing as he pulled away to take a breath, then pressed his lips against Huacheng's once more. This time, the kiss was much deeper. Shilian fully captured Huacheng's thin, cool lips and gently blew in air. His eyes were closed the whole process, not daring to look. After delivering 5 or 6 breaths, he thought he should push down on Huacheng's chest a few times, but the moment he opened his eyes, he found himself staring squarely into Huacheng's own widened ones. There's illustration. Shilian's hand still cupped Huacheng's cheeks, and their mouths had only just parted. Soft, gentle numbness still remained on their lips. It was like the two had turned into stone statues, as if they would shatter with an errant breeze. Shilian's petrification was expected, but Huacheng, who always stayed carefree when faced with all manner of things, was equally stunned. Shilian didn't know how he managed to not drop dead on the spot from all the blood rushing to his head. It took him a good moment to say, "Sunlun, you're awake." Huacheng didn't speak. Shilian dropped his hands from Huacheng's cheek at once and leapt meters back. No. It's not what you think. I just wanted to... To what? Deliver air? Did ghosts need air? If he said that out loud, even Shilian himself wouldn't believe it. Shilian was stumped. Huacheng quickly pushed himself and extended a hand toward him, looking as though he was also forcing himself to keep steady. Your Highness, you... Just calm down first. Shilian clutched his head. He was a mess from head to toe. Finally, he put his hands together as if in prayer and gave Huacheng a deep, abrupt bow. I'm sorry. Having shouted his apologies, he turned around and bolted, fleeing the scene. Huacheng finally snapped out of it, and scrambled to his feet to chase after him, shouting as he did, Your Highness! Shilian covered his ears and screamed his penitence as he ran. I'm sorry! Die. Just die. If I can't die, just dig a hole somewhere and pretend to be dead. His mad dash carried him into the depths of the forest. As he ran, something resembling a sharp arrow came flying at him. Shilian might have been rattled to the core, but his skill did not suffer for it. With a sweep of his hand, he caught a bone spur. He came to an abrupt stop and looked to where the attack had come from, but there was nothing there, only rustling shrubs. With danger lurking in the bushes, he calmed at once and whirled around to hurry back. Sunlun! Huacheng had been trailing close behind, and Shilian's sudden change of direction almost sent him right into his arms. Shilian grabbed Huacheng's hand and dashed out of the woods. Run! There's something in the forest! Huacheng had at first been chasing after him, and he was now being dragged back where they came. Once they made it back to the beach, Shilian let out a breath of relief. We weren't followed. Thank goodness. There are some little things on this island, but don't worry, they won't follow us here, Huacheng commented. Hearing this, Shilian suddenly realized, how could Huacheng possibly be afraid of those things? He looked down and found that he was still clutching his companion's hand. Shilian froze once more, then hurriedly let go and jumped away. Now that there was some distance between them, they fell silent for a moment. Then Huacheng sighed and tugged at his collar. Thank goodness Giga rescued me earlier. Human bodies really are quite inconvenient. I ended up choking down mouthfuls of salty water just from taking a dip in the sea. Disgusting. Shilian wasn't that stupid. He knew Huacheng was giving him an easy way out. But he went along with it, of course. It's nothing, don't worry about it, he mumbled vaguely, head bowed. After a pause, Huacheng added, But Giga didn't do it correctly. Flustered, Shilian said awkwardly, Did I not? I thought I only needed to blow in some air. Yeah, that's not the correct method, Huacheng replied. Don't do this to anyone else in the future. Otherwise, not only wouldn't he save a life, but he might just end a life. Huacheng spoke so seriously that Shilian felt rather ashamed. A good thing he'd never tried doing this before, or else he really would have committed a sin. I won't, he hurriedly swore. Huacheng nodded, then grinned. Although Shilian really wanted to ask Huacheng for instructions on how it should be done, he dared not dwell any longer on the subject, and made a mental note of it instead. He looked around. Is this island really deserted? No trace of humans at all? Of course, Hua Cheng replied. This is Blackwater Island, at the heart of the Blackwater demon lair. He stated that with complete confidence. Crimson rain sought flower and ship sinking Blackwater. The two supremes seemed to know each other. Sunlong, have you been here before? Shi Lian asked. Hua Cheng shook his head. Never, but I know of this island. Shi Lian knitted his brows. I wonder where Lord Windmaster and the others drifted. Perhaps they're here as well. This was the Blackwater demon lair located in the South Sea. It was someone else's territory. Pei Ming's main domain was in the north. The Earthmaster wasn't a martial god, and there was no need to elaborate on the Windmaster's condition. If anything happened, and they incurred the ire of Blackwater Demon Xuan, the only one who could fight back was the Watermaster, and there was no knowing when Shiwudu's heavenly tribulation would hit. The current situation wasn't looking good. Sunlong, does Blackwater Demon Xuan have a temper? Shi Lian asked. What would he do if heavenly officials accidentally intruded on his domain and entered his home? Hard to say, Hua Cheng said, but Guga has surely heard the saying, Crimson rules the land, Black masters the waters. Even I have to watch my step in the Blackwater demon lair. This wasn't simply because it was the heart of Blackwater's domain, but also because they were both supremes. It was best for Hua Cheng to give his fellow Ghost King some face so they could remain cordial. Then we'd best leave as quickly as possible, Shi Lian said. Though they didn't re-enter the forest, they did a circuit of the island's edge. Shi Lian called out a few times, but he didn't hear any response from the Windmaster or anyone else. They probably didn't drift here, Hua Cheng surmised. The two returned to the beach. The surface of the sea was still heavy with gloom. Shi Lian picked up a piece of wood and threw it far into the distance. The wood should have floated, yet it instantly sank upon impact with the water. Shi Lian looked back at the dense forest. It seems like it'd be useless building a boat. The teleportation array won't work here either. How are we going to leave the island? Who says it would be useless? Hua Cheng said. But only coffinwood that's housed the deceased can float in the Blackwater demon lair. He trailed off when he realized it. Coffinwood. There were trees everywhere, and there was a deceased person right before his eyes. Sure enough, Hua Cheng smiled. Won't it work fine once I settle inside? Although he smiled, Shi Lian's heart was squeezed strangely by that statement. Hua Cheng flattened his palm, and the scimitar Emming appeared in his hand. Having committed to the endeavor, they went straight to work collecting materials. They didn't venture deep into the woods, so they didn't encounter anything hidden in the shadows. It took no time at all for them to chop down a number of trees. A whole day of labor went by in the blink of an eye, and the sky grew dimmer overhead. The two divided the work, but competed with each other to scoop up more tasks, so their efficiency was amazingly high. By evening, the coffin was essentially complete. Shi Lian had only eaten a half-steamed one during this entire journey, and was bitterly starving. But the sooner the coffin was made, the sooner they could leave. So he only excused himself to catch some fish after the coffin had taken basic shape. Yet, how could there be fish within the waters of the Blackwater demon lair? Returning empty-handed, Shi Lian instead went to the edge of the forest and picked some wild fruit from the safer areas. But to his surprise, by the time he got back, Hua Cheng had already started a small campfire. He sat by the fire with one hand supporting his cheek, and the other holding a stick with a wild hare forked on it, which he was roasting over the fire. He had already cleaned the wild hare, and it was roasted perfectly, dripping with juice, crisp and golden, the smell fragrant and incredibly alluring. Once he noticed Shi Lian, Hua Cheng smiled and passed the stick over. Shi Lian traded him with some wild fruit for it. These are all edible. Both were still wet and dripping. They were soaked in seawater and sweat. However, there was a tact understanding between them, and neither even suggested stripping out of their clothes to dry them. The meat of the wild hare was crispy on the outside, but tender on the inside. Shi Lian could feel the lingering heat from the fire in his teeth as he took a tentative bite, but quickly found that he couldn't stop eating. He savored the flavor that lingered on his lips. Even as he stuffed himself, Shi Lian conscientiously divided the meat in half, and gave Hua Cheng his due portion. Sanlong has such amazing skills, he sighed in awe. Hua Cheng laughed. Really? I thank Guga for the compliment. It's true, Shi Lian said. I've never met anyone better than you at anything, whether it's carpentry or cooking. That noble, gracious, special someone really lucked out. As he said that, he acted like he was very focused on eating, though there wasn't any response from Hua Cheng. It was a while before Hua Cheng replied quietly, that I got to meet that person. I'm the one who lucked out. Shi Lian didn't know what to say, and tried to focus even harder on eating. Only after several minutes did he register that Hua Cheng was calling him. Guga, Guga. Dazed, Shi Lian replied, Uh-huh. Hua Cheng passed him a handkerchief, and Shi Lian suddenly realized he'd been chomping too hard on the meat. His mouth and chin were covered in grease, and he looked extremely silly. He felt quite embarrassed as he took the handkerchief to wipe himself clean. Hua Cheng passed him the other half of the roast hare as well. Guga must be starving. Don't rush yourself. Shi Lian took it. Though he was a little dismayed, he still broached the subject in the end. Sunlung, just what kind of person is your special someone? He asked. Why haven't you won them over yet? He genuinely believed that if Hua-chung wanted someone, there was no one on earth who could resist his advances. But that day, Hua-chung had said he hadn't won them over yet. Zhilian couldn't help but feel rather glum, and an odd feeling grew toward this individual the Ghost King fancied. It was probably because he thought the other party lacked taste. Or, perhaps, he thought they were taking Hua-chung for granted. It's all right if Gaga finds it funny, Hua-chung replied. But truth is, I'm afraid. Whether it was out of a sense of injustice or a fear that Hua-chung was putting himself down, Shilian responded in a serious tone. What's there to be afraid of? You're the Supreme Ghost King, Crimson Rain Sought Flower. Hua-chung laughed out loud. What a shitty Ghost King. If I really was that formidable, I wouldn't have been so powerless when people strung me up and beat me centuries ago. You shouldn't say it like that, Shilian said. Everyone has to go through trials to grow up. But even as he said that, he realized that he'd never experienced humiliation of that sort before his first ascension. He cleared his throat lightly. That person saw me at my worst, Hua-chung said. Then I'm very envious of that, Shilian replied. Hearing him say so, Hua-chung gazed over. Shilian stopped eating and said gently, But I can sort of understand your feelings. After a pause, he continued. There was a period in my own life that wasn't easy. Back then, I'd always think about how wonderful it would be if someone could still love me for who I was, even if they saw me rolling in the dirt and couldn't get up. Though, I don't know if there's anyone out there like that, and I'm scared of showing that part of myself too. But if it's someone Sunlun yearns for, I think that even if they saw you at your worst, they wouldn't say something like, you're not so great after all. His face grew solemn. To me, the one basking in infinite glory is you. The one fallen from grace is also you. What matters is you, not the state of you. I admire Sunlung very much. I want to understand your everything, so I'm very envious that someone has already met that version of you so early on. That kind of affinity can only come by chance. It can't be begged for. And whether that bond should live on is 3 parts fate and 7 parts courage. The campfire crackled, and the two remained silent for a good while. Shilian softly cleared his throat as he rubbed his forehead. Have I said too much? How embarrassing. No, what you said was good. Very right, Hua-chung replied. Shilian let out a breath of relief and quickly returned to eating the meat. It's not just that. There are many other reasons, Hua-chung added. Despite Hua-chung's assurance, Shilian felt he'd said far too much and wanted to stop discussing the subject immediately. He couldn't understand it. Why did he ramble on like that? And why did he encourage Hua-chung to bravely pursue his beloved? It wasn't like he was the heavenly official who presided over marriage. He could only give a mumble as a reply. After his speech, the air between the two seemed rather delicate, and they quickly finished eating to continue their labor. Soon, the coffin was officially complete. Hua-chung pushed the newly constructed coffin into the water and hopped to sit inside. Although it was a long, heavy chunk of wood, it really did float, not sink. They didn't make the coffin particularly wide, and as Shilian lifted his robes to step in, he felt like there wasn't enough space to sit. Muffled roars of thunder boomed above them, and steely clouds rolled. Violet flashes of lightning streaked from the skies, and their explosive noises startled the ears. Thin threads of rain began to fall, and the downpour only grew heavier by the minute. It seemed a storm was approaching. Fortunately, the two didn't slack off while building, and had crafted a cover for the coffin as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken long for it to flood with rainwater and sink into the depths. The two met eyes, and Shilian softly mumbled, Sorry. Hua-chung didn't say anything more, and lay down inside the coffin. Shilian climbed in fully and pulled the cover over them. As if a candle had been blown out, they sank into darkness. The coffin floated into open water and drifted errantly for a while. Pouring rain beat down on the cover, and the two spoke not a word inside. Their bodies were pressed hard against one another, but it couldn't be helped. They were squished into such a narrow space. The waves pushed and pulled them, flipped and flopped them. Shilian used one hand to push against the edge of the coffin to steady himself, trying his best to make more room. His head knocked lightly against the wood with the motion, and Hua-chung reached out to cradle the back of his head with one hand, shielding it from further bumps. He rested the other hand on his back and pressed him to his chest. Shilian didn't even dare to breathe harshly. Sunlung, how about we switch it up? Switch what? Hua-chung asked. You on the top and me on the bottom, Shilian replied. Top, bottom, isn't it all the same? Hua-chung asked. Shilian was afraid he was too heavy. Our journey will take at least a day. Your body is only 17 or 18 right now, isn't it? And I'm a martial god, I'm very heavy. Before he could finish his sentence, he was forced to exclaim, Sunlong, don't just suddenly turn big! Although it was hard to see in the dark, they were pressed together so tightly that Shilian could feel Huacheng's body transform. While the change was minute, he still sensed it, and assumed Huacheng had probably transformed back to his true form. Sure enough, when Huacheng spoke again, his laugh was deeper, truly his real voice. Shilian lay helplessly on his chest, but after the change, the nebulous awkwardness lightened a bit. Hoping to shift his body and change position, he raised his legs slightly, but Huacheng abruptly stopped laughing. Don't move, he said grimly. Shilian froze. There was a loud noise, and the coffin sank violently. Shilian was bewildered. What's going on? Soon after, there was another roaring sound, and the two were forcibly tossed around inside the coffin. It seemed their vessel had rolled over. Thank goodness there weren't any leaks, but that couldn't be guaranteed if they were attacked again. Huacheng pressed him down. Something's got its eye on this coffin boat. As soon as he spoke, the two felt a familiar weightlessness, and their positions abruptly changed from lying to upright. The coffin boat rose up, then swiftly plunged, flipping over once more. Huacheng's arms were locked in a vice grip around Shilian's waist, with one hand still shielding his head. Hold on tight to me, he shouted. If they were in an open space, Shilian could manage even if the spinning were 3 times as violent. The problem was, they were trapped inside a narrow, tight space. They couldn't stretch out their limbs, and they had no idea what was happening. All he could do was tense and alert while anxiety rolled within. What if the coffin breaks? Shilian wondered. Don't worry. Even if it breaks, I'm here. You won't sink, Huacheng reassured. They were firmly pressed against each other, and Huacheng nearly brushed his lips against his hair when he spoke. Shilian could even feel the slight tremble of his Adam's apple. It made his mind start to wander, but his attention was stolen again by another wave of violent rolling. The boat was like a toy being jostled about by a toddler, and it shook and swung ceaselessly. With no other choice, Shilian embraced Huacheng tightly with one hand, bracing the other on the coffin wall.